viewing pleasure.
All right. Well, Jim, is it week 6?
I think it's week 6. It's flying by, dude. It's flying by.
Yeah, it's incredible. People are still coming in. Hopefully I hope we beat our record. But each week we hopefully keep getting more. Jim, we were supposed to do some poll results and discussion coming off of the webinar, and that was my faux pas. I was too enthralled with what
Bo was saying.
Bo Bullock was saying, and completely lapsed on that we had a poll. But anybody out there watch? Were you here for the webinar earlier this week? Just kind of maybe show of hands or just in chat, a yes or no. If you haven't heard of it, Gary, you were there, right, bud?
I was there, and I got to tell you, of all the webinars I see, it was jam-packed with information. I actually want to go back and listen again because, you know, there's just too much there, and it was all good. It was all good stuff.
Yeah, it's well. So what I love about Bo, and I love about what they do as a company. And, you know, again, this is a shameless plug for Right of Boom, but what we do is, you know, we build defenses based on the lens of a threat actor. And if we understand, you know, how a threat actor acts, we can actually, you know, build a threat informed security program. And so it was really cool to hear Bo how, you know, through the mind of what a threat actor does. It was a lot of fun. Jim, any key takeaways or comments from you, and then
yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, I wish we had 120 people on the SaaS MSP call every week.
Exactly.
But it was,
if you grew a big red beard, maybe you
know,
like
that's
Bo,
what it
might.
is. It's got to be the beard. I mean, everyone now. I mean, well, I like Karl's look the best. But like so many people now in cybersecurity, they have the big beard. You know, it's like almost feel like that's got to be part of the look now.
There was a fundraiser thing at IT Nation, so I think a lot of them are growing it out for that fundraiser to have it shaved.
Yeah, I think it was just in general. People just
in general, it's just
Ryan
pervasive.
Showing off over there. I see that.
Yeah,
that's
well, good. Chip, thanks for moderating it kind of alongside me. Any takeaways from you as somebody building a defensive platform or detection platform, if you will, hearing through the lens of Bo?
Yeah, definitely. So I said to our support team, a couple of those guys were on the call, and some of our engineers, that it was just great to hear someone who's a hands-on, active, you know, effectively a black hat, but in a white hat role, to hear him talk about the kind of mostly reconnaissance was what interests me, because it's what happens before the actual account compromise or breach that I, you know, in a nerdy way get excited about. And that's what we've tried to build SaaS Alerts to do, is to kind of be an early warning system. I mean, obviously it does pick up the stuff that is really bad, but it's the early warning stuff that gets me, you know, cranked up. And Bo just hit all the notes. He was like, yeah, this is what we do. This is how we recon it. And this is why it's important to watch all these accounts. So I really appreciate it. I could probably spend hours in a bar with him.
Yeah. He's a lot of fun. And then I guess before I jump into part 2 here with Karl, the other thing I just wanted to say is it's just amazing the lack of a better word, open source tools that he created and that are available through scripts of what Microsoft, in essence, good or bad, allows him to do recon with. Was that whether alarming or intriguing to you, Chip, of what he's able to find?
So Liran and I had a specific follow-up to that. And I said, my comment to Liran was, I wonder if any of our partners noticed that Bo makes all of these scripts available on his GitHub, free for anybody who wants them.
Yeah.
And there's a message in that, which is that, you know, if you know your way around PowerShell and you're a Windows user and you want to have a bunch of scripts at your fingertips. They're all over the internet. Like you can, there's a term, it's called script kiddie, right? Script kiddies are guys that are like, 14 years old and they go figure out that they want to play on the internet and they can find resources to go and hack people. That's what they do. And that's the beginning of the journey, to a state level actor who's targeting high profile people in an organization with spear phishing campaigns. Like that's where it begins. And he just makes that available.
Yeah.
The reason he does, and he doesn't ask for any money, is because anyone can do it. Like anyone with a little bit of, technical expertise could develop it. So you can tell Bo doesn't even see any value in charging people for his own tools because he knows that they're widely available. You can get them anywhere.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
So the other thing, Andrew, that came out of it is, so rumor has it, Michelle and Bo are now forming a band.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Both, accomplished guitar players. So they're now forming this band.
Yes, I have to practice my metal though. He's hard in metal.
Very true.
It's called SaaS Explosion.
Oh, I like it. Hey, Michelle, even metal needs some good rhythm guitar in the background to kind of keep, driving it forward. So
that's true. We may have to bring in Jonathan too. I don't know if he's on the call. But we're gonna have our own SaaS Alerts band soon. So
very cool.
We need a drummer.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, last thing too, Andrew, I think we would be remiss at the beginning of this call without recognizing the fact that our buddy Gary is wearing his cover your SaaS t-shirt that we gave him at IT Nation.
Hey,
Oh, very nice.
asked and delivered.
Yes, we did ask him. Gary, you're a man of your word. Thank you very much.
Not very often, but once in a while I can do these things.
Hey guys, before we dive in, I want to give everybody a quick program note on me personally. One of my neighbors' houses, about a quarter mile down the road, is in the process of burning down. And I have no internet and I'm running on sketchy power. So no idea what's going to happen here. Right now, we're connected up via cellular and battery. So there you go.
My bigger question, Chip, is what neighborhood do you live in? Are you in Watts or?
No, I live in farm country. And unfortunately, when this kind of stuff happens, there's no fire hydrants, so it's almost like the bucket brigade coming out here. You got all the towns sending their water tanks over to
oh wow,
to try and help deal with this. So I'm not quite sure what happened, but we've had multiple power failures and that kind of stuff going on in the last hour or so. And my regular internet is completely down. So running off an iPad that's got 17% battery. So there we go.
I love how they said when these kind of things
Living
happen,
on the edge, buddy.
apparently they happen often enough that he knows what to expect.
Yeah,
that is true. I do know what to expect. That's when you live in a rural area, that's kind of what you get used to.
Well, all the best to you and your neighbor there. Okay, so look, we've spent the last few weeks talking about assessments, and we're going to touch on that because our guest today is one of my favorites, a long time. Not new to MSP and not new to this industry, but kind of new to SaaS Alerts, and in a good way. I want to introduce Karl Bickmore. We're going to have kind of like a little bit of a fireside chat and get through the lens of onboarding and the backlog that MSPs can have these days. But Karl, before we jump in, it was awesome seeing it at IT Nation, and obviously some of your, I don't know, had 4 or 5 of your people there.
6, yeah.
6, okay. Sure. Why don't you correct me? And I'd like you to correct me along the way here too.
Get it right.
But give us a little background of yourself and SnapTech, and awesome to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, well, look, hey, getting the band back together again, right? Or forming a new one. I don't know.
Yeah.
I see a lot of names here on this chat that I recognize. So, hey guys, I know many of them from other calls that I've done in other places, and it's a fun and eclectic group, and a group of people that are actually out there doing some of the cutting edge stuff. So I'm glad to be joining this one, even though maybe I'm a little late to the party here, but we're pretty excited. I'm the CEO of SnapTech IT. We're an MSP with offices in Atlanta. the Phoenix, Arizona area where I'm at, and also some folks in San Francisco, serving clients, mostly financial and CMMC or defense industrial based clients.
Yeah, very cool. So Karl, I went over to the booth, had lunch with Jim. He's like, yeah, Andrew, pretty cool success story. Jim, why don't you tell me about that, what you said to me?
Yeah. So it was just like, typical happenstance at, I guess, IT Nation. So I never met Karl before. I didn't really know his organization. Someone from his team had come over and was talking to myself, Ryan, and Pat about the fact that within the first 5 minutes of onboarding a customer onto SaaS Alerts, they found a compromise that was in progress, right? So I was telling Andrew the story. It's like, who's the MSP? And I said, oh, SnapTech. You ever heard of him? And he goes, have I ever heard of him? That's Karl. Like, so it just kind of went from there. So that's how Karl ended up on the call today.
Yeah. And so I started to think about, backlog. And what I wanted to talk to Karl about is, onboard. I wanted all of us to kind of get in the minds of our onboarding process and, what backlog potentially could look like. Are you rolling out tools? Should you roll out tools? But starting off, Karl, you approach a new customer or any prospect with a full-blown security assessment. I hope we have some time to talk about that. You charge a fair amount for them. It's nothing you ever give away.
Right.
But let's get into onboarding a little bit. You have a backlog. You guys are a pretty successful MSP. What's typical backlog for you guys look like right now if you win a deal?
Well, so, we measure it in a couple different ways. There's like, how many projects are we waiting to execute on and how many hours have been sold into those projects? And we used to have this KPI that we always wanted our backlog to be at least 600 pre-sold, ready to go. And we're topping over 2,000 now. And this year, it's just nothing but growing. And we're producing more of that onboarding or just project work than ever. And still the backlog grows and grows. And this has produced like interesting situations because it's just naturally meant that some things just have to be gotten to later. And so there's this gap between when we sell it and when we can actually begin or when we can complete. We may begin and then pause and then come back to it later. So that's specifically to the backlog picture. It's just 3 and 4 times what it used to be even a year ago.
And is that a labor thing? Is it you guys getting better at selling? Is it a combination of both? Growth?
Oh, yeah. So why do we have the backlog? I would say that we've become much better at selling, put a lot of time and focus into building up our sales team starting in 21, big investments in that area. And we started seeing it paying off after about a year of starting that program where the action really began. And so, it used to be that we would kind of have customers come in around once a month, and now we're finding ourselves having deals closing 6-7 times a month. And it's just very different pace than we used to operate at.
Got it. Just quick question to everybody, and just maybe a Y or an N in chat. Is anybody dealing with a backlog? It doesn't necessarily have to be 2,000 hours like a Karl, but anybody, when you win deals, there's some kind of wait until you guys offboard a previous MSP or onboard, your platforms and tools and processes. Anybody dealing with that? Just a quick.
And Andrew, while people are answering that, I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit more with Karl.
Please.
And understand what's been this, since you started that new sales process, what's been the secret to your success?
Well, I think that more than anything, we put our big boy pants on a little bit and threw the right amount of budget and resource to it. I felt like we had really tried to do it like smart and strategically, but never really had gone all out and really gone for the number. And I feel like there's not a lot of peers I've seen in our space that have actually gone as far as like now our mentality has gone into it. But I also recognize that we really didn't have the proper skill set in-house. So we went heavily into consulting on it as well to build out our process and for our recruiting. And so, we went from like essentially a couple of owner sellers which we've been for a long time, to having, I think now 4 business development reps on staff, 2 account execs and a CRO on the team now. That's like a highly polished guy that has built companies from the 2 to 40 and 50 million size twice, you know.
Okay. Wow.
It's interesting though, Jim, what he's mentioned. Like, to me, it's like we get this question a lot about where do I start in sales? And I'm really glad to hear, Karl, that you put a lot of emphasis on business development, because I think that's the engine is so critical. I know we're getting me potentially off track a little bit, but I think it's important and it's relevant always, because it's about getting in the door and building your database. How critical was that for you? And then maybe just briefly talk about.
I'll give some more of the secret sauce on this. Like, you know, look, a lot of the times we figured out that the marketing wasn't driving a lot of realistic potential buyers. And so it's about emailing, webinar events, in-person events, and a lot of just chasing after people that we got out of zoom.info as a tool, which is a really great, not an expensive tool, but a really great tool that would queue up a set of people to go out to build into our database. And then, you know, the guys that do that, they are comped 50% salary and 50% quota, and their only quota is to book first-time appointments with net new opportunities. That's our business development motion, right? They get fed from marketing, prospects, and they get fed from lists that we work on, and all they do is book appointments, and each of them have a quota to book. At least 5 appointments a month. Some of them have a quota to 7 now because they've been able to produce with net new customer opportunities. And with that many at bats, we're just closing a lot more deals, you know?
Yeah. So talk to us, let's lead into a little bit about assessment and tools. Talk to us about, you know, how you build wedges and your conversation around security, because I think it's pretty much you lead, correct me if I'm wrong, your conversations that way, and you won't engage without an assessment. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, look, and it's not just any assessment. It's not a light assessment. It's not a discounted assessment. It's an assessment, which, you know, even for a small company is going to be at least like 20 billable, you know, at 190 to 250 an hour, depending on what we're doing at that time and where we're at. But, and then we asked them to allow us to either put a Dropbox in that machine or Dropbox in that kind of, or to give us access to a system, but we prefer kind of that where we drop an assessment computer into the mix. And then we have to figure out how to get access to things like firewalls and their cloud resources, and to be able to scan and evaluate those, because that's become really the edge and the frontier where most of the security stuff problems begin, is out in things like Office 365 or Google Workspace or Dropbox, or, you know, any of those kind of things that they might be using. And so, yes, it's the first purpose is to sell an assessment. And then from the assessment, then we will propose services if we think we're a fit. And those assessments, like I said, 20 is this kind of the smallest one on hours, labor, so 8 to 10 grand, and then up depending on the size and complexity of the customer. But that whole point of view is like, what don't you know? And what are you unsure of? And if you don't know that, how on earth could I tell you what it would take to do your IT? And how would I know what it would take to secure your environment if I don't know everything you have and how it's currently configured and where the risks are? And so that's kind of like our overall point of view is IT is a risk management exercise. It should be producing profit for the company, and it should be risk controlled. And a lot of times, like with the smaller customers, this is a revelation to think about how to do risk management in a way that we're going to try to teach them to do, which is just a more formal approach to risk management. But I find it's a risk conversation in which leads that assessment is just necessary in order to measure the risk.
It's interesting, Jim. I don't know if you want to say it, but it's just really interesting. I'd love everybody to comments, questions from you guys, because I don't want this to be all about.
Andy's got one.
Yeah,
I see his hand up.
Awesome. One second. I just want to make this comment. What I'm finding, and Karl, I'd like your comment on this, and then anybody else. What I'm finding is the MSPs that are selling right now in the 250 to 300 a seat, IT is a byproduct. It's a security-driven motion first. And oh, by the way, and IT is something driven, that lags behind the risk conversation. Is that a fair way to position it or say it, Karl?
Yeah, no doubt. Look, I mean, we evaluate their IT for best practices and we talk about it, but it's kind of like the bullet point after we point out what they fundamentally, once again, it comes down to simple things, simple conversations. Technology should help you make profit and be more efficient is typically how it's going to be. And it should be risk controlled so that you don't have unnecessary risk or damage risking your company's viability. And it really just comes down to those two principles, right? IT is about uptime and availability, and cybersecurity is about risk control, right?
Yeah, I think, Andy, as I hand it to you, I think two big things that companies don't think about is incident life cycle. You know, a customer, potential customer, you might be speaking with Karl. Incident life cycle, what do you do if, to walk me through it? I think you typically get blank stares. And then the other thing is about, you know, your risk tolerance in your business. And, you know, do you guys have any, you know, concept around that today, and what, you know, how you view that? And I don't think most small to medium businesses have good answers for either of those.
Look, and not that long ago, I didn't in my small business, you know, it's something I've had to learn as I've gone along. I just am glad I learned it a little while ago, not just yesterday, you know?
Yeah, fair. Andy.
So my question to Karl is, when you bill for these assessments, do you include looking at contractual relationships? In other words, are you doing assessments for security against just the NIST framework, or are you also looking at requirements contractually that lend into a compliance issue as well?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. And that's exactly how an assessment could have a different scope. So I'd say, like, you know, I feel like this is like one of the things we learned back in the day following the service leadership guidance on operational maturity levels. There came a point in time where we stopped saying every assessment costs X and this. We started saying, okay, what's the need and what's the situation? So like if it's a client that's going to have a compliance need, we will custom build it to what that will be. And that would absolutely include, how are you doing vendor due diligence? What are your hiring practices like? You know, let's get to the 800, 171, all 100 of those controls for this assessment, as well as governance and the risk management piece, right? Or for a small, you know, 30-person law firm that is a fine customer for us as well, we may not get as deep into that piece. We might keep it more into best practices and the fundamentals of cybersecurity, because it's just, we're not going to be able to drive the conversation that far, and there's going to be plenty of things to fix at there. So I think, you know, one assessment like that 30-person law firm is probably a 20-hour billable assessment. The one that's a CMMC client, even if there's only like say 50 users, that could easily be a 60, 70-hour assessment where we're getting all the way into the other pieces. And we may ask them to get a subscription to a GRC tool so that we can properly manage the evidence so they can use it for an audit purpose later.
Okay, where I'm, I guess, ultimately going in is, your initial discovery is we're going to do a security assessment against a known standard. And
yes,
ultimately, if you have contractual relations, regulatory requirements, that compliance element will be separate from this initial assessment for the most for smaller customers. Okay.
Yeah, not necessarily. So maybe a better way of saying is, if it's a client that we think it's going to need to be a NIST assessment, either the 800, 171, or even maybe some also, if they're a level 3 on the CMMC, they might need 172 as well. Then that's the standard we'll generally go against, but we have a supplemental section for just general best practices that we add to that. For a client that does not have a specific standard, we measure them just against our own created assessment based on the cybersecurity framework, which is very generic and no specific controls. So we have our own set of questions we created around that.
Where I'm going with this is, some contracts, either with vendors or other associations, might call out for compliance requirements outside of the NIST framework. And so that's my question ultimately.
Yeah. And so the question, do we look at that? Yes, we'll ask for any policies and procedures that they have, and we'll ask for any engagement. So like if we come across an application or a major tool that they're using that we see there's potential risk in, we will ask for what their contractual obligations are, or for what they're delivering to their customers. That is something we will look into. It's not typically covered in a smaller type assessment at that level, but that's something that we'll put on the roadmap and do in a process of having them as a customer if it's not in the assessment.
So
I
then
don't know if
taking
I'm-
this, no, you're good. I'm just trying, then the last question around this ties to kind of like the SaaS Alerts thing. For those customers that have cloud-based operations, yeah, let's say they're doing AutoCAD in the cloud, or they're doing something else, right? And and they're completely dependent on that as a role. How do you validate the cloud provider is meeting their obligations back to them for incident response plan or disaster plan or something to that effect?
Oh yeah. So look, we have a vendor due diligence process that's that we will apply and share with our customers in the process. And so that involves a risk assessment based on several categories, like the country risk, the operational risk, the technology risk, the reputation risk. And so we will just go through that process. Like we'll ask, hey, does this vendor have an audit? Have you received it? If not, we'll go ask the vendor for that audit. We'll review that audit. And then we will ask, hey, do you have an SDLC? Do you have a guarantee? How do you do your backup? We have kind of a form email that we send to that vendor to ask for that, whether we're doing due diligence for us or an existing customer, or we could do that in assessment as well.
Right. And does that also imply you dip into their supply chain as well?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Really good stuff. Anybody else? That's been great questions, Andy, as well.
I'll just comment on this, Andrew, because at this point we're working with so many MSPs and we can see kind of the growth. And so we work with a lot of really fast growing MSPs like Karl and others, a lot of, many of which are private equity backed at this point. So which ends up fueling their growth. But it's almost like it's flipped in terms of, the fast growing MSPs are leading with security as opposed to IT. IT is the laggard, right?
Mhm.
In the conversation, it
No
just
doubt.
comes along. Whereas back when I was an MSP, it was the inverse. It was like we did IT, and by the way, we'll do some security stuff along with it. It's completely flipped for the ones that are growing the fastest right now.
100%.
It's just a much better message as approach. It's more like helping the user understand the end result, which is what they actually care about.
Exactly.
Carl, the other thing that I think it's important. Your secret sauce. I'm joking around, but I think the thing I love about the way you position your assessment too is it's very non-threatening. In that you're like, look, if at the end you're going to have this deliverable. If you want us to do your IT and security, great. If you wanted to go shop it based on this deliverable, great. I mean, talk to us about that, because I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think anytime they always have three options. This is classic challenger sales methodology or mentality too. If you've ever read that book, the challenger sales model, I love it. I think it's great. And one of the things is you try to educate them. You try to give them insights of things they didn't know. You tell them assumptions of things you see all the time. But then there comes a point in time where they got to say, okay, now I understand. I've been educated, I've learned something. I like this guy, but I really have three choices. I can do nothing. I can take this to somebody else, or I could do it with SnapTech as an example. And so I like to just call that out and say, look, whether you're going to use us for long-term, that's not the decision we're making today. Today, we're deciding whether you need to know more, and if that knowing more would make it more valuable for you to be able to select a vendor or to make progress or to understand your actual risk. And I let the sale of MSP be later. Right. But I'm happy to say, hey, take the assessment, and maybe this is all we do, but it's going to be valuable to you. Know what you're going to learn. No matter what, you're going to learn something. You're going to know more, and you're going to know better how to interview IT companies. So we'll just teach you how to do that. I secretly know on the back end that once they become educated and I teach them these things, that they're going to realize and be able to separate out that we are probably one of their better choices.
I love the way you also inherently, you're kind of, whether it's subliminal or not, I'll help you evaluate IT companies when you're coming in as a security.
It's very subtle. You're right. It's subtle, but it's so effective.
It's very well done.
That's what they're doing, right? And so, we'll teach you how to do it. Look, that's actually a big point of mine. I'll teach you how to manage IT afterwards too. I'll teach you how to manage us,
Right. Hey, so Karl, get into now.
Andy's got another comment.
Just to follow up on this, do you find that you have to do this personally, or are you able to do this with video? Is there any point where, as a part of your prospecting process, you might be using YouTube or some other medium to help convey and build that premise first?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's almost a sort of a complicated question too. I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing in our webinars that turn into recordings, that turn into videos and content on our website and social posts and things like that is about setting the stage for this type of conversation for those that tend to do it that way. Not a lot of buyers in my experience are looking for that, but those that are that kind of personality that want that information deluge, we do have some of that going, I would say. And, you know, look, I'm pretty old school. And when it comes to sales in general, I would rather not do anything over Zoom. I'd rather not do anything over the phone. I'd rather be sitting right across the table from them and let them see my honest point of view. Right. So what can I say? But dude, does that mean that we don't sell over Zoom and don't sell over the phone? We absolutely do. And some customers, that's what they really want. And they're okay with that buying motion. I'm just old school. If I can force an in-person or I can make it happen that way, I will always take that first.
Okay, thank you.
So Carl, let's bring us up to speed where this all kicked off. When you win a deal, they're in the queue. Talk to us about, you know, things that you're going to want to put in there now. So, because there's this, you know, timeline going on, and it's obviously debatable on who owns the risk here. You know, they've signed an agreement, you know, you want to argue, well, there's, you know, time and it's still this other company's responsibility. It's their tools. But talk to us about, you know, what you learned. Not, I don't want to come as a SaaS Alerts pitch, but knowing what you guys did and what you saw immediately, like, is it changing how you might do things, and what tools do you leave behind in that lag?
Well, I feel like the SaaS Alerts picture is just fitting right into a mentality that we've really worked hard on. And it's just another tool that's making us be able to hit the thing that we came to. I mean, a lot of the tool set journey we've been on comes back to like a very large customer that we onboarded now several years ago. And during the onboarding, we were through the firewall with awesome intrusion detection, IDS things turned on, and really cool, you know, lockdown stuff. And we had deployed our advanced next gen antivirus with all of its configurations done, and everything was cruising along. Then when, you know, this is a very large client, so we're talking months into it. We then threw our MDR SOC solution into the mix, and bam, instantly found there was an active adversary in that client. And that client had probably been there at least 6 months before we got into the picture. And until we had visibility, we did not know that client was happening. And so, you know, that's a whole story for another day. But I tell you, the thing that we came out of that with is like, okay, holy cow, we've been just going out to new clients and throwing out our RMM tool and getting dug in and standing up user counts for us and all this kind of stuff, and not really thinking, holy smokes, that could compromise us and all of our customers. And so we started to get this mentality of like, okay, we should treat every new customer like they're already breached. And have that as a default posture, and be careful about how and when we deploy remote control tools or RMM things or things that can automate, and then how that could be exploited back into us or other areas. And so the thing that's painful about that is it's like, you know, we recently deployed SaaS Alerts on a net new customer. It was actually one of our original proof of concepts with SaaS Alerts that we're like, okay, we're going to try it live in a place. This customer's up for it. We roll it out. Very shortly, very easily, we're getting very important risk information back about an active compromise, right? You know, Belarus active logging in, doing stuff in a mailbox, right? And so what that ability adds to us now is the ability to deploy first, have visibility first with ease, not time consuming. And if I'm not going to finish our workover, because we have a standard security module for, say, Office 365 for every customer, but we may not get to that until we're like a month and a half or 2 months into the onboarding process, the way things are going now. But if I could, in a very short period of time, rip a SaaS Alerts out there and just know some risk stuff that I didn't know beforehand, it could completely change our priority and our risk profile and how we're dealing with integrating that customer. So to me, it's just now another tool in the quiver to easily give us visibility into critical information, and then allow us to prioritize and operate in a time frame that is appropriate.
Could you see using it, and back to the original question, because we've been beating this up, and I think Chip wants to beat me up. Hopefully he lost it when I say this, he lost his power because he doesn't have to hear me.
Nope.
But Carl, like, could you use this in an assessment? Could you?
Yeah, so that's exactly the next thing where we're going. And I was really excited to see, because we're just still new to SaaS Alerts, but I saw in the engagement process, I'm like, hey, you can do this for assessments. You're not going to get charged, and understand the timing and how billing works, but you can really roll this out and do some things to get a lay of the land. Absolutely. Now I can know even before I'm onboarding them. Now I can know this stuff and use it in the assessment process and help with the sell and the risk picture to the customer, letting them know, hey, by the way, active adversary found, or these configurations are extremely risky, or this, so to me, look, that's the whole idea between what I think SaaS Alerts is for, is we can all gather these alerts in very manual, difficult, disparate ways across several SaaS systems. This is a packaged up, done way, inexpensively, way cheaper than I can manually put it into every customer with the bits and pieces we had to do. And so now, why wouldn't I roll it in assessment? Why wouldn't I roll it early in an onboarding? It's nothing but helpful,
Yeah. Could you see one of the things we talked just briefly about was messaging apps, like things like Slack, Carl. People maybe, whether it's, pushing out, documents externally or things like that. Could you see it used there? Maybe it's the law firm you're talking about, their messaging apps.
Yeah, Slack, Teams, Google Chat, whatever these things are that are out there. Look, these are all the risk points we know. And that's where some of the shadow IT happens. And that's where the people are like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh man, do I need to back that up? Oh, is that data important? What do I really have out there? Gosh, I really don't know. My users just have it and they do whatever they want to do with it, right? And so, or just, some cloud file system, what am I doing with my SharePoint or my Dropbox or Ignite or Citrix share file? What's going on with those things? And do I really know where it's being shared and what's just out there with who, So to me, yeah, that's where, look, the world is different. We don't have a defined edge anymore, right? It's anything can kind of go anywhere, and there are apps that can really be ubiquitous and easy to go. So it's like, yeah, that's a big part of a conversation, is how do you secure all these cloud or SaaS things, and how do you get visibility into them? And it's hard to get a hold of it. It's difficult. We've been doing very manual things for this. That's what we find attractive about SaaS Alerts, is it is simplifying something that is very hard for us to get a hold of on our own.
Nice. Jim, so you must be really upset to hear all this.
Yeah, this is devastating. So no, thanks so much, Carl. Really appreciate it. And Andrew, great idea bringing Carl on, talk about some of this stuff. But one of the things that I heard you say, Carl, in terms of rolling out, for instance, like RMM initially, the way I heard you talk about it, you understand the inherent advantages and risk associated with RMM. I'm assuming because I saw you at IT Nation. Are you on Automate?
We are. Yep.
Okay. So are you leveraging SaaS Alerts to monitor Automate at this point? And do you find value in that?
Well, so to be honest, because we're so early, I'm not sure where we're at in our development, but I know we would think that way. So what can I say? Anything that can help us build out the alerting and the information system is better. We have a lot of things that will tell us things going on. We use other tools as well that help us now. But to me, it's like, what are the ways we can use SaaS Alerts? Would we think of it as, how do we protect our own house? Yeah, absolutely. And all the ways that means, we host servers in Azure for ourselves. We have our own SaaS subscriptions and our own tool set. And look, to me, the inherent risk with the RMM is just outstandingly bad, because it's so very bad to get a hold of, difficult to get a hold of, very difficult to restrict. Automate in particular is very problematic. It's very hard to do like a reverse proxy or put up some type of WAP in front of it. It really doesn't work. We're doing some interesting, fun things with AppGate around that right now that we're liking, but ultimately we still have this problem that we need these agents to check in from anywhere, kind of freely, and it's a big risk,
Yeah, which is exactly why we're so ardent about making sure that we're covering as many of the MSP tools as we do. So I know there's folks, using, Ninja and could say VSA and obviously Automate, IT Glue. So, we're giving away monitoring of these applications for free because we know inherently how important it is to monitor these and provide information back to you to protect your own house, so to speak.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Carl,
I mean, I gotta admit, I'm a little bit late to the game on some of the details because my team is really running with this, but that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's been one of our principles from the very beginning is you get to protect your own domain for free, that whether it's 365, Google Workspace, or the MSP tools. And we'll have a majority of the MSP tools, completely done by end of Q1. And again, that's free. And our hope is that mitigates the risk for you and your customers long term.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, look, every now and then we've been involved in incident response cases, and the ones that we've been called in on are mostly MSP compromises. And almost universally, it's their RMM tool that became compromised that caused the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Karl,
Right.
you've mentioned that you're doing all of this assessment and awareness, and then you sit down with them and report. When you onboard a customer, you're beginning to deluge them with a lot of change management, a lot of information. How have you been able to? How have you found best to raise their awareness and have them consume and understand the parts that they need to understand and focus? If you're sending them a weekly report, or you're saying this is the progress we're making this week, or this is the milestone that we're targeted for, how do you keep that cadence going?
Yeah, man, that's a really good question. I would say that, that's an area that we're always thinking about. And one of the things that I feel like has been really nice as a part of our onboarding process is we ask for an all hands meeting with their team. We don't always get it. Sometimes it's just with critical managers and whatnot. And we'll lay out the fundamentals of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and say the next 3 months is usually kind of our point of view, or whatever onboarding / remediation things are happening. And we'll get the questions going there. And then just as a normal process of any of our professional services team that does these change implementations, we do have a regular weekly reporting cadence for any open project where we're constantly reviewing the plan, what's accomplished, what's next. And then we have a recap at the end where we kind of go over what we did and where. But I will say, look, not every customer is interested in that amount of information. And that's the part where it's challenging. I do find that we deluge them sometimes. Sometimes we get on board and suddenly we're like, hey, give us your list of all of this and get us, we noticed all these accounts on your Office 365 that probably should go away. Look at it. Tell us which ones to kill. We do have a whole cultural thing we have to spend with them, and it takes months to really get through that. Even if things are clipping along, we're making changes. So, man, I don't know, but that's a really good question, because I find that is a problem, that we do deluge them with too much. Sometimes it's hard for them to keep up.
It's kind of like teaching a student algebra, right? You got to get the fundamentals. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of and how we get them to adopt that this is actually important and necessary for them. They sense it, right? They're aware of it, but when it comes to the practice, they've got their whole routine they got to begin to address. So,
well, and even if they believe it, they just don't know what it actually takes.
Yeah.
Karl, I'm curious if your team uses the SaaS Alerts risk report as a mechanism to show the little company who thinks that nobody's interested in them, just how much activity is being banged on their front door. I like, because I deal with this conversation a lot, right? Well, how do we get our customers to recognize that there actually are threats against them? And we point to the risk report, and I'm always curious to see how partners are able to leverage that to engage the discussion.
Well, so look, it's something that we're still finishing our onboarding process. We're still very new to this conversation. And I've only just seen that report so far, but it looks like everything I would want. We've had a similar thing that we've done with customers in our QBR routine with our SOC SIM, where we'll show them, hey, look, here's your Office 365 map. Look at all these thousands of things. By the way, this is only a 1 hour picture. You know, it's like we show that stuff with the little geographic map with all the little red X's coming at them. You know, and that's been like pretty much impossible for us to do at an early stage. So to me, if SaaS Alerts has a report that's able to kind of get that picture out early and easy, and we don't have to have our whole SOC SIM in place in order for that to work, then that's just even better. And so I always like client focused things that help them understand risk. And I have found that whether it's that report or a similar kind of approach we've done in our QBR around just showing them what's going on and being caught by the tools, I always find that that is something that does hit home with the customers, because they're like, I had no idea how much of this is going on out there. And when it's really staggering, there's no customer too small for this kind of stuff. And it's thousands and thousands on a daily basis, and they just don't understand it sometimes until they see it graphically.
Awesome. Carl, I know you told me 1:45 Eastern you needed.
Yeah, sorry. I'm actually supposed to go present in my own company's webinar here next. So,
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Carl, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
hey, nice
Thanks,
to see
Carl.
everybody and all the familiar faces. I recognize a lot of you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Carl.
See you,
All right,
Carl.
take care.
All right, Jim. So yeah, bad info there, huh?
Yeah, I mean, what a waste of time that was.
So Jim, you're up next. Talk to us about IT Nation. What was the booth like? And when I say what was the booth like, useful stuff for the partners. What were you hearing? And was there anything? How about the good, the bad, and what might have surprised you?
So good people like Carl coming up, he wasn't the only one, hey, whether they've been with us for a while or they just started the trial, you guys have saved my bacon. I've caught compromises, already, that type of thing. Always, I can never hear that too many times, right? Andrew, you know that. So those were great conversations. And then prospects coming up and saying, hey, what do you guys do? And then you explain it to them and they're like, oh yeah, we need that. That's awesome. So that's fantastic. In terms of surprises, I guess I was surprised that so many people showed up, considering that there was a hurricane rolling into town.
Right.
There wasn't a hurricane. That
I
was
know.
overrated.
Look, it wasn't bad. My flight was canceled into Orlando, and I'm thinking when I landed in Tampa and then drove to Orlando, I'm thinking to myself, what was the big deal?
Gary, he was referring to you, by the way.
Yeah.
I was there a day early. I don't know what everybody's complaining about.
So it was, I think it was great. I mean, all the way around. And obviously I've been to a bunch of them in the past, but it was, I know one thing that was a little surprising, I guess, is that, SaaS Alerts came up in the conversation. So ConnectWise did a session on CW SIM, and we got thrown into the conversation on that one. So that was a nice plug.
Do you know how so?
Yeah, I do. That was one of our partners. And I was actually going to bring that up since you said the good, the bad, and the surprising. I would call this a bad. So we got brought up by one of our partners who said, are you basically trying to do what SaaS Alerts does? And they had to dance around the answer because it's not exactly the same thing. Yeah, they're going to ingest logs and present it to you just the way it came out of Microsoft in a pile of stuff with everything else, which is handy if you don't have the option like SaaS Alerts. So what I would call the bad that I picked up on, and I hopefully we did a good job with the partners that asked, was the impression that some folks had that maybe what SaaS Alerts does is a SIM. Or they're just trying to put it into a bucket where it doesn't really fit because it's kind of unique and innovative. Like they're like, oh, so you're more like a SOAR. And we're like, okay, kind of. So getting to have those conversations and show people like, yes, there's a value to a SIM, there's a value to a SOC, there's a value to a SOAR, and an XDR, even though I think that's just a marketing term. Those are all valuable things in some aspects. There's still nothing that really does what you need the way SaaS Alerts does, taking that antivirus approach to business email compromise. We don't want to do analysis for an hour and figure out if this is potentially dangerous. Let's just stop the activity. We'll do the analysis afterwards. It's a lot more secure than waiting for a 1 hour SLA from a SOC to just stop with what is a potential breach and then move forward after the fact with figuring out how you got there.
Yeah,
So,
I think what's cool is
That's key. That's really key.
What's that, Andy? Go ahead. Sorry.
What he just said is that we're able to be proactive and stop an activity that could be really detrimental before waiting an hour, right? And as long as the customer can accept that as a action point, this is a strong, in my opinion, selling point.
Yeah. So that what I was going to say is exactly what Carl said, because I've known Carl for years, and I remember specifically the company he was talking about where they were onboarding Andy. And again, if you look ubiquitously at MSPs and you ask MSP after MSP, the majority have their SOC SIM deployed in a regulated customer. You're not going to see it, across their customer base as on the margin. It's you're meeting a regulatory need, and that's why it's initially deployed. So you have this large gap in your customer base that isn't that isn't having O365 monitoring, because that's inherent in their tool set of that SOC SIM offering, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for pointing that out, Andy. It is definitely a big selling point that I think a lot of people probably miss.
Yeah, it was just announced to me, and I kind of went, "That's actually a very good thing to do."
Yeah.
So I'll make a point to say that.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other things, Andrew, that I think people missed based on the numbers that I see in our dashboard is stale user account cleanup.
Yeah.
So I wanted to take the last 9 minutes to make sure that everyone knows what it is, where it is, and how to use it.
Awesome. Do you want to have Liran take that over? And
yeah, that'd be great.
And
yeah. So Liran, if I know you're on, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and just providing a quick 8-minute tutorial again on guest user cleanup and why it's so important.
Sure. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing to point out, which I thought was interesting, like I always knew, right, guest accounts were bad, but this is the Microsoft documentation, and I've highlighted their best practice, which says guest account status is set guest account status to disabled, so that the built-in guest account is no longer usable. And yes, it's out of context. You should do your own research. But it seems to me, right, like Microsoft is telling me to turn off guest accounts. Well, how do I get my lawyer the contract? I just don't think what they're saying here is really feasible. And again, do your own homework 100%. I spent maybe 10 minutes just reading this. So, okay, let's just say this isn't feasible. So then what do we do? Well, a couple things. So this is RQA environment, so just a quick note on that. But I'm going to go in to my account management tab, and it's right here in organizations. I think at this point, we should probably remove the beta functionality on this. So something for us to take a look at, but I'm not going to even filter organizations. I'm just going to say, show me all guest accounts whose last sign-in is greater than 30 days ago, and then go, just show me. I'm sure you guys are going to have more than my tiny little QA environment has, which only has 5. But this is in essence telling me, look, these are guest accounts that haven't signed in since September 20th. Do I really need these things around? At the same time, I can also expand this and go 36 months, a year, never. Right. So once I'm in here, what do? Well, I can select these, or I can select all. And by the way, we've tested this with numbers upwards of 10,000. So doing a handful of these here should be no problem. Now, if I did go and block these people would yell at me. So I'm not going to do that. But if I did say block sign in, I believe that, I was hoping that there's a prompt that it doesn't just do it. So are you sure you want to do this? I'm not going to go ahead and do this, but this is one way that you can do this. And then we can also look at all the jobs that have run or are running. So this one completed, and then these things have errored out for some reason. Typically when we test, they error out when they've already been blocked. So if you want, you can go and you can look at the activity to see that these things are getting done properly. And just to highlight, right, you don't have to just do guest account 30 days. You can remove, another one that I like to do is I'll remove this and say, just show me accounts that have never signed in. So again, this is a test environment, so this is not reflective of a real world situation. But if you have customers that have accounts that have never signed in, do they really still need to be there? And an enhancement that we've had asked for here is give me the created dates on the accounts, so I'm not just blowing away brand new accounts, which is something that we plan to address as well. But those are just kind of two different use cases, right? Accounts that have never signed in, do they still need to be there? And then guest accounts that are whatever your threshold is, 30 days, 90 days, and then select all, block. I would block for the most part. I wouldn't really delete, even though Microsoft gives you a kind of that 30-day grace period, but I would just block for the most part. I'll pause here and see if we have questions.
So my question there is it considered, if you've blocked logins, is that now considered to be, safe? Or is there any vulnerability at that point?
That's a great question. So again, do your own testing with this. And I mean, I have done it. I have not found a legitimate use for a blocked account. You can't sign into it. There's nothing you can do from that point henceforth with a blocked account. I guess one potential vulnerability that would be if I got admin access to a Microsoft tenant. I mean, there's going to be bigger problems with that situation, right? But I could then go ahead and start unblocking accounts and maybe start taking ownership of files that those guys have. But I think for the most part, blocking an account is a very safe thing to do.
So the follow-up to that is, part of what we're looking here at are the guest accounts that are, at least in our tenant, often created by external file shares.
Yes.
I have one for my accountant. So we haven't used it because my taxes were due 6 months ago. But if I then go to re-share something or publish something to that same disabled account, will it re-enable them, or will they not be able to have access because their account has been disabled in my tenant?
Yeah, I believe it's the latter. I believe that once you block an account, you have to go re-enable the account. So in the trade-off game that is security, are you okay with your accountant coming to you and saying, hey, it says my account is blocked. Oh, okay, let me unblock you and take care of that. Or maybe if you know it ahead of time, you could go ahead and do it ahead of time.
All right, so what we need to do is test we need to test to know exactly what it's going to look like for somebody if they've gotten it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's not going to let them in. I don't think it's going to reactivate the guest accounts when you reinitiate a share, because that would be way too easy of a security loophole to get around.
Right. No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Andy.
I have a question about this action. So once I take this action, I want to be able to report by customer back to them, hey, we've disabled these accounts and I want to keep a log of what we've done overall. So how can I brand this so that it's clean? This is the action we've taken. We do this at the beginning of every month, boom, right?
Great question. So if you pull up the activity, and by the way, like when you do this and you're blocking a healthy number, it's going to show you like a status wheel thing, and you can click on it to get the details, and it'll look something like this. So I clicked view activity on this one, and it opened up on this tab, and you can see that our user Harsh blocked sign in on TRTR, and it was blocked by Harsh, and there's a job ID. And so
Okay.
like, yes, you can do that.
I'm looking to create something that's customer facing and serve. This is a reference log. Wonderful. If I wanted to say, hey, law firm, hey, medical practice, hey, whomever else, this is the start of the year. I mean, start of a month. We went through and disabled any guest account that hadn't been logged in the last 30 days. And here's that. And here are the results of that. So this is occurring. Is there a way for me to create such a report process within SaaS Alerts?
So I'm racking my brain about our existing reports, and I think there is, but it's not as pretty as what we would want it based on what you just said, right? So
You believe that would be valuable, that kind of reporting?
yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
on the call, we have Amanda Robinson, who is our new product manager. And one of her areas to focus in on is going to be reports. And I think this is a great enhancement that we can take a look at doing. And that is kind of like, what has the MSP done for you? Especially when you consider that we are working on a proactive way in a respond rule specifically. And again, that's thanks to these types of calls that we've had where you guys have asked us, hey, can you put together something proactive so I don't have to go in here and do this once a month? Yeah, we can. And we're working on doing that.
And that's exactly where I'm going with respond. If I'm able then to say, do this on a scheduled basis, send this report, update the help desk log, and then we can begin to create a scoring system that says, this is how we are making a difference. Again, selling security versus IT is the theme, I guess, of today's meeting, right?
And Chip brings up a good point. I mean, you can export this, but I think what you're looking for is like a pretty report that is ready to go. That is, here's the value that we are bringing to you right now.
Exactly. And this is ongoing because you're going to make enhancements and I need to be able to communicate. So remember that whole issue with Karl was how do you communicate this with your customer that these are valuable things that we're doing for you, right? And I think not overwhelming them and batching this together and kind of doing this on our review with them would be very helpful as having this be part of that review process, especially around cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to show you that, but I don't think Jim would probably kill me.
And what's kind of neat is that if I'm doing an assessment, I can say, look at all these guest accounts that haven't been logged in over 30 days that are exposing you to potential hacks.
Exactly.
There's a counter to that as well.
Yep. So we're at the top of the hour, actually, a little over. Another great call. I'm going to say this before we adjourn for today, because we don't have a call next Thursday and Thanksgiving, unless you guys want to convene and we can have our turkey dinners together. I'm cool with that too. But in the meantime, we came out with RBAC, role-based access control, which is a great new feature. Liran and team did a great job releasing it. Definitely please go out and start using it, test it out, try it, because on the next call, we'd love an opportunity to start asking your opinions and feedback on it.
You can reach out to me at ryan@saasalerts.com if you're interested, and we'll enable that for you.
Just a quick note, that is currently in beta. So it's, we're still working on fine tuning that.
And that's why your feedback would be good at, obviously this is a much smaller group right now. So, we can throw this out there now, but you guys have been fantastic about feedback. So this could be really helpful. So, okay.
Thank you guys.
Thanks everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you all.
Okay. Bye.
Everyone.